I'm pregnant with Steven's child, my sister Pamela announced, her voice dripping with smugness. The baby will be here soon. Please break up with him before it's too late. I was stunned, dismayed. Pamela, who had always been carefree and irresponsible, was now flaunting her affair with my husband, Steven. She had cheated on her own sister's husband, and now she was pregnant with his child. It was all so shameless. It's because you couldn't get pregnant that this happened, Pamela sneered, her eyes gleaming with malice. You brought this on yourself. You're just defective, aren't you, Angela? Steven, standing beside Pamela, laughed, his eyes cold and calculating. It's not like I need another defect in my life. I'm getting remarried, so let's just get a divorce. If you want to, I'll break up with you. But I wonder if it's Steven's child, he said, his voice laced with cruel amusement. He's after Pamela's son, you see. With those words, he turned and walked out, leaving me alone with my sister and a growing sense of despair. I was so shocked, so utterly betrayed that I couldn't even speak. But as the silence settled around me, a strange calm washed over me. This wasn't over. They had pushed me too far. I would make them pay. My name is Angela. I married to Steven, the vice president and son of the company's president, when I was 30. My in-laws, who had treated me kindly even when I was just an employee, introduced us, and my parents blessed our union. Everything seemed perfect at first. I continued working at the same company, and life seemed to be going smoothly. But it was all a facade, a carefully constructed illusion that shattered soon after our wedding. Steven, initially charming and kind, transformed into a demanding, controlling tyrant. He became increasingly distant, spending his evenings out with his friends and coming home in the early hours of the morning. He started squandering money, dumped his work on his junior employees, and claimed it was all business. The man I thought I knew, the man I had fallen in love with, was gone, replaced by a stranger. Hey, Steven, if you're going to be late, could you at least let me know? I asked one evening, my voice trembling with frustration. Why should I have to report my schedule to you? I'll do whatever I want, he barked, his face contorted with anger. But I have to prepare dinner, so shut up. He stormed out, leaving me feeling small and insignificant. The man who had once showered me with attention now treated me like a servant, demanding my time and energy while he did as he pleased. It didn't take long for his true colors to show. He was a spoiled, entitled son who had never learned the value of hard work or responsibility. He complained about his job, about his colleagues, about everything. He never brought money home, and I was left to manage all the household expenses on my own. Hey, could you contribute a little to the household? I asked one day, my voice barely a whisper. Even just for groceries or utilities? Why should I give my money to you? He sneered. You work too. But we're married, Steven, I said, my voice cracking. Shouldn't we share expenses? Don't talk to me like that, he shouted, his face red with rage. You're not my boss. This is why I hate people like you. It makes me sick. Don't show your face for a while. This is going nowhere. He stormed out again, leaving me feeling utterly defeated. I was trapped in a marriage with a man who saw me as nothing more than a trophy wife, a means to an end. I hesitated to consult my in-laws. They were good people, and I didn't want to worry them or cause friction. But I was at my wit's end. I couldn't keep this secret any longer. The house we lived in had been built by my in-laws. They had provided the money and allowed Steven and me to make all the decisions about the house. Back then, he had been reasonable, and we had enjoyed making those decisions together. Now it felt like a distant memory. I wanted to repay their kindness, to show them how much I appreciated them. I needed their help. I needed someone to understand what I was going through. I'll try a little harder, I told myself, as I set off for work, determined to make a change. 3 years into our marriage, Steven's behavior had only worsened. He was a spoiled son, a man-child who had never grown up. He boasted about not contributing financially to the house, and he spent his evenings out drinking and playing around. People whispered about me, about my inability to control my husband. They called me timid, a poor woman stuck with a no-good man. I felt like I was being judged, scrutinized, and condemned for something that wasn't my fault. Why let your husband do whatever he wants? I heard a coworker whisper one day. If I were in the same house, I couldn't stand it. Is she afraid of divorce? Another coworker chimed in. Even with him like that, if she keeps quiet, she'll be the president's wife in the future. If the spoiled son becomes our president, it'll be like the president's wife is practically the president, a third voice added. It's like a takeover. Such a quiet face, but scary. I felt my face burn with shame. I was trapped in a nightmare, a prisoner in my own home. I was surrounded by whispers and gossip, and I couldn't escape. Angela, you look pale. Are you okay? James, my father-in-law, asked me one day, his voice filled with concern. Yes, I'm okay, I managed to say, forcing a smile. Thank you for asking. My in-laws, James and Christine, had been subtly looking out for me, but I still couldn't bring myself to discuss Stephen with them. I kept postponing the conversation, feeling as if I was hiding something, tormented by guilt and unable to tell them the truth about my situation. I became less talkative and more withdrawn, and it felt like a growing distance had developed between me and my in-laws. We now read each other as if handling a delicate matter, which pained my heart, despite their genuine kindness. Playing the good girl again, right? I heard a coworker whisper. Would she like to be the president's wife, even with such a terrible husband? She's a gold digger, another coworker chimed in. Might not be entirely wrong. They even have their house built. The whispers followed me everywhere, making the workplace an uncomfortable place. I felt depressed, dreading going to work each day. The only saving grace was Dan, the managing director, who treated me with a very impartial attitude, despite Stephen's dislike of him. Angela, could you make a copy of this document for me? Dan asked one day, his voice businesslike. Yes, Dan, I replied, trying to ignore the whispers around me. Playing nice with both the managing director and the vice president, I heard a coworker whisper. Trying to please everyone. Kind of a either would be fine as president vibe, isn't she? Jesus, such an ambitious woman. I'm just doing what I need to do, I mumbled to myself, trying to reassure myself. No matter what they say, I'm just working. It's not my fault. But the whispers continued, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, judged, and analyzed. Later, I heard that my in-laws had confronted Stephen, telling him, "We cannot let you take over the company as it is." Stephen, red-faced and furious, had told me, "It's your fault because you can't have kids." I don't understand why we've come to this, I said, my voice trembling. He comes home in the morning almost every day, and there's no way we're going to have a baby. Why would they say that? Your parents just want you to work seriously, Stephen said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. You're saying I don't work? Don't be ridiculous. I'm much busier and contribute more to the company than you. I earn a much better salary. There's no way you would understand my work. He was beyond help. He was like a child throwing a tantrum, and I just had to wait for him to release his stress. I shrugged and waited for the storm to pass, while he continued to yell. It's your fault because you can't have a child, he shouted. We need a son. Go through fertility treatment or whatever and hurry up and produce an heir. I can't, I whispered, my voice barely audible. Don't talk back, he roared. He started throwing things around the room like a child throwing a tantrum. I crouched down, covering my head to avoid being hit. Okay, I'll undergo fertility treatment, I said, my voice trembling. Will you help? Why should I bother? It's your fault. You're the defective one, he sneered. Don't make a fool of me. I was frightened by his rampage, but at the same time disgust and exhaustion overwhelmed me. Why did I have to endure this treatment? My in-laws had meant well by warning him, but it seemed to have backfired. Such actions were unimaginable for normal people. If I do as he says, at least the tantrums will stop, I thought, giving up on everything and becoming submissive to Stephen. A year into the fertility treatment, as Stephen demanded, the test showed that there was nothing wrong with my health. I was capable of conceiving. The doctor suggested that the problem might be with my husband, but Stephen stubbornly refused to get tested. Hey, pause for a moment. Would you care to support us? Like this video and subscribe for more. Now let's dive back into the story. He would become sullen and sometimes lash out at objects, leaving me and the doctors unable to speak up about the situation. Suspecting infertility, Stephen told me to see another doctor, But no matter where I went for tests, the results were the same, and Stephen just got more irritable. "Could you come to the hospital with me just once?" I asked him humbly. "There might be things I'm not noticing on my own." "No, I'm busy," he said, his voice cold. "I don't have time to deal with your mess." "But without your help, we can't even do IVF," I pleaded. "It seems there's nothing wrong with my eggs, so I'd like to move to the next step. I know it takes your time, but could you just help this once?" It seemed I was right to say it was for my fertility treatment instead of Stephen's test. I thought he might refuse, but at least he wouldn't be too upset. He frowned slightly but looked at me scrutinizingly. "You're paying for this treatment, right?" he asked, his voice laced with suspicion. "Of course," I said. "It's my mess. I'll take full responsibility." "Okay then," he said, his voice still laced with arrogance. "I guess I'll go." His arrogant attitude was exasperating, but this way I managed to get Stephen to the hospital. He started talking about money almost immediately, making it hard to tell who was the real money grubber. However, seeing me actively trying to have his child seemed to improve his mood significantly. He probably liked being adored, no matter how old he got. He was childish and immature, even at the hospital. He reluctantly followed instructions, and then, ignoring me and the doctor, he left on his own. I was left alone to listen to the doctor's explanations, feeling utterly lost. That's just the kind of person he is, I thought, as I walked out of the hospital. His subsequent actions didn't surprise me much. One day, my sister Pamela suddenly visited, her face beaming with a radiant smile, her large belly a clear indication of her imminent motherhood. I had a bad feeling about this. "Long time no see, Angela," she said, her voice dripping with false warmth. "Why are you here?" Seeing her proudly smiling with her big belly, I had a bad feeling. Pamela had always been the carefree type, living at our parents' house until recently without working or doing much of anything. But ever since I married Stephen, she'd stopped coming around our parents' house. At first, our parents were worried, but knowing her playful nature, they assumed she must have moved in with a boyfriend and gave up. I never imagined she'd show up suddenly, pregnant and about to give birth. "I'm pregnant with Stephen's child," Pamela announced, her voice dripping with smugness. "It's going to be born soon. Please divorce Stephen for me." It must have been planned. Stephen, unusually at home, embraced Pamela's shoulders and sneered at me. "Pamela is right," he said, his voice cold and calculating. "A woman who can't get pregnant is unnecessary. I've stayed with you to save face for my parents, but I've reached my limit. You spent all that money on treatments and are still not pregnant. Stephen's bothered by it, you know." He looked down at me, his eyes filled with contempt while Pamela smiled triumphantly. Their closeness and their despicable appearance left me beyond anger. I was dumbfounded. "I've been in trouble because she wouldn't get pregnant, no matter how long I waited," Stephen continued, his voice dripping with venom. "You're just defective, aren't you?" Their words were vile and hurtful. They seemed to think of nothing but how to hurt me. "He doesn't need any more defects like you," I thought, my heart pounding with rage. "I'm getting remarried, so let's divorce," Stephen declared, his voice cold and final. "Just get ready, please. Give me a moment." I was lost for words. I knew he was promiscuous, but I never expected him to cheat with my sister. I had thought it odd how flirty Pamela acted when I introduced Stephen, but I never imagined it would go this far. "Okay, I'll get ready," I said, my voice trembling. "Please give me a moment." Judging by the way they reacted, I had broken them both. Pamela and Stephen seemed pleased. What drives them to this extent? I thought, my mind racing. I don't recall ever doing anything to harass or hurt them, but it's shocking to realize they dislike me enough to treat me this way. "Stress is poison to the baby, you know," Stephen lectured me, his voice dripping with false concern. "If you had any decent sense, you'd celebrate your sister and husband's new beginning. Pack your bags and leave quickly." "Actually, can you just leave now?" Pamela sneered, her voice laced with malice. "A useless woman who can't bear children is no good around here. Go back to your parents' house. They're sweet on you, even though you're a failure, right?" Her words made my blood boil. My parents, though plain, supported me as I diligently studied. but it was the same for my sister, despite her late nights out. They worried and scolded her, caring for her until now. I don't think my parents' love was unfair. I suppressed the urge to yell, trying to stay calm. "It will take some time to pack and explain the situation to everyone," I said, pretending to be disheartened. "Please wait a little longer." They were visibly pleased, especially Pamela, who, despite her forced displeasure, couldn't hide the smile on her lips. Her expression twisted as if she enjoyed tormenting me. "I don't want to see your miserable face," Pamela said, her voice a shrill, artificial falsetto. "My Pamela and the baby could get sick. We can't help it, so we'll rent a hotel today. Just leave now, okay?" After saying what they wanted, they left the house. The house was bought by Stephen's parents. They must have wanted their son to be responsible, and they cared about it deeply. My parents were worried about my sister Pamela. The two of them trampled on everyone's feelings. I will get my revenge, I thought, my heart pounding with a newfound determination. Absolutely. If he wants to, I'll break up with him, I thought. I wanted a divorce too, so that part was welcome. But I will never allow those two to be happy. Just watch. I'll show them hell. I prepared and left the house immediately after packing, but for the divorce proceedings, I kept dragging them out for various reasons. Meanwhile, I actively worked on laying the groundwork with others and gathering evidence. Since my sister's belly was quite large, she would probably give birth while I was making my revenge preparations. Because of their lack of planning, this situation arose. Being unmarried and giving birth must be difficult, but they seemed hardly aware of it. They told me to get a divorce quickly, like harassment, but I didn't see their desperation truly. They are despicable people. I don't care if they're in trouble, but is it Stephen's child? Because of my wondering, I boldly decided to consult with Stephen's parents. They had also been informed by Stephen and were consulting with me, so it was a good opportunity. Everything was ready now. All that's left is to show them hell. A month flew by, and I received news that Pamela had given birth. "How dare you show up here?" Pamela sneered, her eyes filled with hatred as I entered the hospital room. "Still haven't divorced Stephen?" Clinging desperately to him. The smirk on her lips meant she was enjoying taunting me. Stephen also followed her lead, giving me an aggressive look. "I don't know what you told my parents, but we're strangers now, so stay out of it," he said, his voice laced with venom. "I thought I'd get scolded by my parents. I think it's because of your unreasonable behavior. But there's no point in saying that, so I'll keep it to myself." "Oh my God. Is Angela stalking Stephen?" he added, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "It's troublesome. I have Pamela after all." They are blissfully ignorant, I thought, holding back, trying not to show any emotion. "Congratulations on the birth," I said, my voice calm and steady. My words were met with nothing but condescending looks from both Pamela and Stephen. They can only act like this, for now, I thought. "Hello, first of all. Well done on the birth." My in-laws entered the hospital room, their expressions stern. After that, my parents also came in. "Sorry for coming in such a large group. We have something to discuss. Things might get a bit hectic from here," my parents said. Pamela and Stephen, thinking they had won, sneered at me. "Dad, Mom, finally a grandchild is born. Isn't it great?" Pamela said, her voice dripping with false warmth, already buttering up the in-laws. "Pamela, it seems we've spoiled you too much," my dad said, his voice firm. "Never did we imagine you would grow up to treat your sister this way. We thought we'd always be on your side, but this is our limit. You are no longer welcome in our house. You are disowned." My mom started crying upon hearing my dad's words. "We told you over and over to be considerate of others' feelings, but it was all in vain," she added, her voice thick with emotion. "Wait, what are you talking about?" Pamela was bewildered by the suddenness. "Mom, I can't believe you'd say such a thing to me. Someone who has just had a grandchild. I don't want to be part of a family with people like you anyway." Stephen was on Pamela's side, putting his hand on Pamela's shoulder and glaring at my parents. "How unreasonable to say such a thing to your tired daughter who just gave birth," he boasted to Pamela. "I can't forgive you. Even if you are Pamela's parents, I'll protect you, so don't worry." "Thank you, Stephen," Pamela said, her voice laced with gratitude. They were completely in their world, intoxicated with themselves. After all the trouble they've caused, Pamela's ability to insult her parents as poor people is unbelievable. My parents, who were insulted, must have been more shocked than me, but they seemed prepared, showing no sign of disturbance. Perhaps unknown to me, there were already disputes and conflicts between Pamela and our parents, and they had given up on her long ago. "You look indifferent, but you are disowned too," my father-in-law said, his voice cold and hard. "I'm not handing over the company to you, and you are fired as of today. Don't show your face ever again." "What? What do you mean by that?" Stephen raised his voice, his face contorted with rage. Pamela was pale and trembling. The status she insulted her parents for calling them poor was now hanging by a thread. I struggled not to laugh as I watched the two of them panic. "I'm the only heir, right? We've had a child, doesn't that secure the family's safety?" Stephen asked, his voice laced with desperation. "What are you talking about?" The in-laws were appalled by Stephen's argument. Stephen looked pathetic, almost ready to cling to the in-laws. Pamela still hadn't fully grasped the situation, just flustered, comparing the in-laws and Stephen. "I thought I could trust you with the company if you were capable," my father-in-law said, his voice laced with disappointment. "But even making you vice president was a mistake. I'll leave the company to a trusted employee." "What the heck? Don't mess with me!" Stephen's tantrum finally exploded, his yelling echoing around the room. But his parents were used to it and didn't even flinch. "I'm talking about being president in the future," Stephen said, his voice shaking with anger. "There's no way I'm allowed to do that now." "That was your declaration," my mother-in-law said, her voice firm and resolute. "We had nothing to do with it. You say you're going to be the president, and it seems you've even borrowed money," my father-in-law said, his voice cold and hard. "But find a job yourself and pay back the money. We can't take care of you anymore." It wasn't surprising that Stephen was in debt because he played around every day. He's a vice president, so he should be earning a decent amount, but his extravagant lifestyle and taste for women meant that his salary was never enough. It seems he had also bought cars and condos without the in-laws or my knowledge. Who knows how much debt he's accumulated? Pamela finally seemed to grasp the situation, abandoning her ingratiating attitude and glaring at Stephen. "What do you mean? This isn't what we discussed. What did I even have this child for?" But Stephen seemed too preoccupied to care, engrossed in yelling at his in-laws. "You told me if a grandchild is born, prove the lineage. I even did the tests for that." "What was all that for?" The color drained from Pamela's face. It seemed she would be in trouble if the tests were carried out. "What? What are you freaking out about?" Stephen frowned at Pamela's shriek as if annoyed by her. He glared at her as if to say she was annoying. Their previously affectionate behavior seemed like a lie. "It's supposed to be my child, so there should be no problem," Stephen said, his voice laced with confusion. "Why are you throwing a fit?" "I'm busy, so just shut up." "Actually, about that." The doctor my dad had called entered the room with a troubled expression. This friend of my father-in-law had agreed to help with my revenge. "Pamela's child is not related by blood to Stephen." The room went silent for a moment. Pamela gasped for breath, and Stephen was sweating at the doctor's words. Their faces turned pale. Thinking this was my only chance, I reached into my bag where I had secretly stashed numerous photos and pulled them out. "What's this? What is that?" The photos were of Pamela. There were dozens of photos of my sister with men. Some were of a man and woman entering a hotel, where the woman was consistently my sister, but the man was not always Stephen. Since her belly had gotten bigger, she seemed to have refrained from dating, and I couldn't gather any evidence. However, my sister's ex-boyfriend had hired a detective to conduct an infidelity investigation. I compensated him for the investigation fee and acquired the results. Pamela's ex-boyfriend, dumped because she was pregnant, had hired a detective. "If you wish, I've also gathered testimonies from the ex-boyfriend and other partners," I said, my voice calm and steady. Stephen looked at Pamela with murderous eyes. He was trying to act like a victim, but he must also fall into this hell. "And remember when we went to the hospital for fertility treatment?" I asked, my voice laced with a hint of triumph. I had those test results too. Tests I wasn't informed of. Fertility treatments require preliminary tests. That's standard, the doctor said, trying to stop Stephen. Yet he ignored the doctor's words and left on his own. His selfish actions had backed him into a corner, leading to this situation. It was his fault. Your sperm motility is extremely low, the doctor said, his voice firm. You're undoubtedly infertile. If you think it's a lie, take a good look at the test results. No, that's a lie. Stephen's reaction was more delightful than I had imagined. His face turned pale and he snatched the test results from my hand with trembling hands. His eyes widened as he read the content over and over, sweat pouring from his entire body with each word. His lips quivered as if he might collapse at any moment. The DNA test also showed the child isn't yours, I said, my voice laced with a hint of amusement. And the father is probably one of the men in these photos. Stephen then thrust the test results at me and yelled, Pamela, did you deceive me? But Pamela shot back just as fiercely. Shut up. It's your fault. You don't have sperm. It's not like that at all. What an ass you are. Stephen seemed in denial of reality and then glared at me. What a mess. Hey, you're lying, right? How can I believe this piece of paper? You're just harassing me. It's because you're rejected. The defective one is you. Am I defective? I asked, my voice laced with sarcasm. The outrageous remarks made both sets of parents frown. It's unclear whether he's unaware of the surroundings or just doesn't care. The more Stephen spoke, the worse he made his situation. My test results from every hospital came back normal, I said, my voice calm and steady. If you don't believe it, why don't you go and get tested at various hospitals yourself? I can't be bothered, Stephen said, his voice laced with arrogance. Would that cut it out? Finally, my father-in-law raised his voice. You need to stop it. It's disgraceful. Don't add more embarrassment. Please, Angela doesn't deserve this. At the words from the in-laws, Stephen faltered. Instead of his yelling, Pamela chimed in. It's all your fault now. I'm doomed too. What are you going to do about this? Shut up, Stephen said, his voice laced with anger. That's my line. You tricked me and brought a kid into this. Just disappear. What followed was an unbearable and nasty argument. Their relationship, after all, was connected by money motives. Both their true feelings and desires were exposed, making it embarrassing for anyone watching. If it weren't for your money, you'd have nothing good about you, Pamela said, her voice dripping with venom. Don't act high and mighty, you flashy old maid. Both sets of parents just shook their heads in dismay. I'm at a loss for words, my mother said, her voice filled with disappointment. How could you have turned out this way? The baby is the one I feel sorry for. It's not the child's fault. I was also worried about the child being raised by such parents. The future seemed uncertain, and it was even questionable if they'd be raised properly. Despite our worries, Pamela looked over at us. Apparently, her matters were more important than her child's future. It's because you caught a weird man, Pamela said, her voice laced with bitterness. My life is ruined. What are you going to do about it? Take responsibility. Stephen grabbed Pamela by the shoulder, looking like he might hit her. What did you say? Don't touch me, you sterile man. Truly, it was utterly exasperating. I let out a long sigh, releasing all the patience I had been holding back. Your irresponsible actions are your own, not my fault, I said, my voice calm and steady. I'm the one who wants you to take responsibility. What? Don't mess with me, always looking down on me. I've always hated that look in your eyes. In reality, it was Pamela who looked down on me, who could only live seriously. She might have had her grievances against me and our parents. What a coincidence. I also have always disliked your words and attitude, I thought. You've continually looked down on me. What a way to talk. You're an unattractive woman. That's why you get dumped. This must be what they call a double standard. It's just nonsense what they're saying. Negotiation is a waste of time. To conclude, I've decided to make them both take responsibility. I presented Pamela and Stephen with a copy of the demand for damages that I had a lawyer prepare. I'm also filing for divorce from Stephen. Since trying to resolve anything through discussion with these two would be futile, I took drastic measures. Both of you will pay properly, I said, my voice calm and steady. Considering the years of treatment I endured, the amount is small. They exploded in anger as if set on fire. A demand for damages from my sister? Pamela shrieked, her voice laced with outrage. That's unacceptable. A money grubber? Are you that desperate for money? I just wanted to show them hell. The money was just a means to that end. From their reactions, this seemed to be the most effective way. The spectacle of their disgraceful behavior eventually wore thin the patience of both sets of parents, who raised their voices. Considering what Angela has been through, this is a small price, my father said, his voice firm. Be grateful it's no more. Someone who cheated with her sister's husband now has something to say, my mother said, her voice laced with disgust. Talk about not knowing when to quit. However, scolding from blood-related parents does not affect selfish people. Their eyes glared as if everyone but themselves were enemies. The sight of someone going half mad, hair disheveled, is terrifying, even if you're prepared for it. If you also say we're strangers, then stop pretending to be parents, Pamela said, her voice laced with anger. That's right. You have nothing to do with us anymore. If they had shown some remorse here, perhaps the disownment could have been revoked. Foolish people. They prioritized their desires and trivial pride without even realizing it. Why is this happening? Stephen and I made eye contact. I had a bad feeling, but Stephen acted before I could. He glared at me with a murderous look and lunged. Angela, it's all your fault! I instinctively screamed, but the expected impact never came. Dan! I gasped, my voice filled with relief. You were here too. Dan, who had been outside, restrained Stephen. My father-in-law, looking down at a gritting Stephen, seemed sad. Our company will be left to Managing Director Dan, so you can rest assured and work to pay the damages, he said, his voice calm and steady. Stephen hated Dan the most. He had always feared that his position was being threatened. That fear had become reality, and finally his mental balance was disrupted. Like a tantrum-throwing child, he started screaming and thrashing, but Dan, holding him, didn't flinch. I always knew he was unmanageable, but never thought it would come to this. Are you all right? Dan asked, his voice filled with concern. Take him away quickly, please. Soon after, security arrived. They took Stephen from Dan and tried to take him outside the hospital. It seemed Stephen finally realized his dire situation. He broke free from the security and clung to my leg. The pitiful look in his eyes, filled with tears, was utterly revolting. It was my fault. Please don't leave me, he cried, his voice filled with desperation. Do you have no problem, right at all? Dan spoke the words I wanted to say. He then pulled Stephen away from clinging to me and protectively put his arm around me. Stephen seemed to realize everything with this whole sequence. Don't mock me, don't think you're the only one who can feel good, were his parting words. I hoped never to see his face again. I just hope the loss proceeds smoothly. Left in the hospital room, Pamela saw me and her complexion changed. Hey, you're seeing other men too, aren't you? I don't know what your misunderstanding is, but she hasn't been dishonest about anything, Dan said, his voice firm and steady. I'm just smitten with her and have been courting her. That made me blush. I looked down, wanting to hide my flushed face. Both sets of parents and Dan watched over me warmly. Later, Stephen and Pamela were cut off from the family and chased by debts and damages payments. Stephen intended to become a husband to Pamela, but she, declaring she had no interest in a man without money, left him. They also did not take the child. Instead, my parents adopted her and named her Deborah. She's a lovely girl. It was always intended that they would take her in, but seeing Pamela abandon her child at the hospital made them realize just how awful she could be. She's not someone who can take care of a child. While my parents are mainly raising Deborah, I, having returned home after splitting with Stephen, help with her upbringing. I continue to work at my ex-in-law's company, maintaining good relations. My ex-in-laws also dote on my niece as their grandchild. The child is thriving and loved by everyone around her. I heard Pamela, needing to pay me damages, got into the nightclub business, but fell for a host and disappeared before settling her debts. Stephen, pursued by debts and damages payments, was ditched by several women who were only after his prospective presidency. Moreover, with his massive debts and damages payments far from over, those he owes money to seem to be reaching there. Let's conclude the story shortly. Years later, I married Dan. We have 2 children and live happily. Come on, today we're going to Grandma's house, I announced to my children, watching them scramble to get ready. Yay! I'm going to play games with Deborah, my youngest daughter exclaims, her eyes sparkling with excitement. Don't be too demanding with Deborah, okay? I remind her, a warm smile spreading across my face. My relationship with Deborah is good, and she's adored like a real sister by my children. Angela, watch your step, Dan says, his voice filled with concern as he helps me with my coat. Thanks, Dan, I reply, my heart overflowing with love for him. Even after years of marriage, Dan remains kind to me. I fell for your strength of character, he says, cherishing me with a warm embrace. With him, I feel we can overcome anything and stay happy forever. It must be a reward from God for all I've been through. Dan, I love you, I whisper, my voice filled with emotion. Me too, he replies, his eyes filled with love. I finally grasped happiness.
All right, everyone's presentations are done. Nick, the manager, said as he tried to move the discussion forward. Excuse me, I haven't. I recently found out something. Nick interrupted me and began to speak. There's apparently someone in this department who didn't graduate high school and is just a part-timer. Meetings should be for employees only. Absolutely right. His lackey, Mike, of course, agreed with Nick. I'm leaving. After leaving the meeting room, I started to shut down my computer. I noticed that an email had arrived, not in my personal inbox, but in the company's shared email. Thinking, there's no point in speaking up, no one will listen, I went home quietly. The next day, I heard a commotion from Nick's desk. He was staring at his computer screen, his face pale. Nick? Is something wrong? Mike looked at the screen with him. And he turned even paler than Nick. Why is he so angry? Knowing the reason for Mike's distress, I thought to myself, serves them right. My name is Adam. My mother passed away when I was in the 9th grade, and I was raised by my father. Well, you could hardly call it being raised. After my mother passed, my father changed. He drowned his sorrows in alcohol, and though he still went to work, he squandered our living expenses on horse racing. Because of that, I had to start working part-time as soon as I entered high school. Every month, I went to the convenience store with bills in hand that couldn't be auto-deducted from my father's account. Even though I endured it because I didn't want to be alone, I reached my limit in my second year of high school and dropped out. I found a live-in job at a distant inn. Thank you for everything. The day I left home, my father, still staring at the TV, spoke. Take care. That was our last conversation. Back then, 18 wasn't the age of majority, so I needed my father's permission to work, and I couldn't hide my place of employment. Yet, my father never visited me even once. I kept working just to survive, and before I knew it, I was 42. Years of hard work paid off, and I was transferred to the headquarters. I was thrilled to be recognized by the company, as I thought I'd be working in the field until retirement due to my lack of formal education. Listen up. Our work can change the future of our employees. Don't drag us down. On my first day after the transfer, Nick, dressed in an expensive suit, spoke sternly. There was a reason for this. Our inn was located in a prominent tourist destination, known so well that everyone in the state could sing its commercial jingle. At its peak, we had 5 locations within the state. But that was long ago. Due to financial difficulties and aging facilities, only the place where I had worked for many years and the original establishment remained. I was prepared to lose my job anytime, but now there was a glimmer of hope. With the rise of social media, the tourist area where the inn was located started gaining attention again. Depending on how hard the sales department, where I was transferred, worked, we could either thrive or be forced to give up this prime location to the new hotel chains continuously popping up. For Nick, who had switched careers from another industry to strengthen our sales, this was a battle he couldn't afford to lose. I understood why he had to be strict. I will do my best. Nick sneered at my enthusiastic declaration. Did you not hear what I said? I'm sorry. I thought I was listening carefully. Out of habit from years of customer service, I apologized reflexively, though I had no idea what had offended him. Someone was watching me with a smirk. In this department, there are those who are expected to excel and those who have been shoved here because they have nowhere else to go. You are the latter. It was Mike, the section chief. He's 7 years younger, at 35. But he was called to headquarters much earlier than I was and had been moving around within the headquarters ever since. I'm not jealous, but I can't accept that he's my boss. Graduating from a prestigious university, he has an unusually high pride and caused many problems as a newbie, making things very difficult for me when I was the front desk leader. When I found out Mike was transferred to the sales department a month before me, I was disheartened. Mike is right. With just a middle school diploma, there's not much you can do. Don't even think about achieving results. As if I didn't exist, Nick remarked, I'm thirsty. Mike eagerly ran to the coffee maker. It seems Mike is Nick's lackey. I regretted being happy about my transfer to headquarters, wishing I had stayed on site forever. Send a direct mail to every company on this list by the end of the day. Nick only assigned me tasks that even a new graduate could handle. What? There are over 1,000 companies. You want me to send to all of them by today? Yes, if you and your fellow misfits split the work, even those with nowhere else to go should finish by today. I glanced at the employees typing away expressionlessly. They were worn out from customer service, only thinking about leaving on time, or were women reassigned after having children, with zero motivation for work. Even Sam, a new graduate from the same university as Mike, who was supposed to be among the expected achievers, had no enthusiasm for the job, having joined the company wanting to do customer service. I don't care what they say, I plan to quit any time, he said. Only Nick and Mike were highly motivated, making all the decisions between the two of them. I originally only wanted to work at the inn to survive and had no particular attachment to this job. I swallowed my words, thinking I had no right to reprimand them. About a month after the transfer, Nick told us with a frustrated look. To commemorate the 50th anniversary, we've decided to create a plan exclusive for one group per day. Originally, Mike and I were supposed to come up with it, but our president, Mr. Thompson, insists on hearing everyone's opinions. So, you all get a chance. As Nick explained, Mike began handing out prints. Make sure not to embarrass Nick. If your ideas are half-baked, you'll have to redo them. It seemed that they had printed his handwritten notes by Mr. Thompson, which included several questions and a section for free responses. It made sense why Nick had to seek our input, given that all responses had to be submitted to Mr. Thompson. We were given a week to think about it, and a meeting was scheduled to compile our ideas. My plan is to let guests enjoy both the old and modern America. Nick began the presentations. Guests would watch a master confectioner at a nearby traditional sweet shop make sweets in front of them. The welcome drink would be premium tea in a bottle. Nick's plan was certainly attractive. After his presentation, Nick called on us to present in the order we were seated. Just as I stood up for my turn. All right, everyone's presentations are done. Excuse me, I haven't. I recently found out something. Nick interrupted me. There's someone in this department who didn't graduate high school and is just a part-timer. He was likely talking about me. I joined the company as a part-timer and was made a full-time employee when I turned 20. That was 20 years ago, so Nick and Mike probably had no chance to know until recently. Meetings should be for employees only. Absolutely right. After that, Nick kept creating opportunities to solicit everyone's opinions, purposefully excluding me from speaking. The meeting unexpectedly heated up and went past the scheduled end time. A few people asked to leave, and the discussion continued with the remaining few. Still here? Normally, you'd leave in that situation. Though I had no attachment to the job initially, hearing kind words from customers made me want to make them happier. For someone like me, with nowhere to go, the inn was my home and customer service was my life. I felt pathetic about my current self. I'm leaving. I left the conference room and started shutting down my computer. I noticed an email had arrived, not in my personal inbox, but in the company's shared email. Thinking no one would listen to what I had to say anyway, I quietly went home. The next day, while preparing the DM as instructed, I heard a commotion from Nick's desk. In his haste to stand up, he hit his knee on the desk. He stared at his computer screen, his face pale. "Nick! What's wrong?" Mike, thinking he should be the first to rush over, approached Nick while still wearing his coat. He peered at the screen with Nick. And he turned even paler than Nick. Why is he so angry? Who is responsible for this company? Nick, more irritated than ever, asked, and Mike answered without checking. Probably Sam. Sam wasn't there because he was attending a morning training session for new hires. Nick gave up on getting angry and returned his gaze to the screen. They were looking at an email that arrived right after the end of the working day yesterday. Apparently, no one, including me, had checked it before leaving. The email was from a large company that used us for their annual employee trips. The president and executives of that company also frequently used our services personally. President of the company, Mr. Mason himself, had declared that neither he nor his company would ever use our services again. Well, some companies cancel their employee trips or stop using our services due to financial struggles. Let's just move on. Mike kept wiping the sweat from his forehead with a handkerchief. Knowing why Mike was so agitated, I quietly watched their interaction. Do you know how much revenue we get from that company? We can find other guests to fill the rooms, but we'll lose the banquet costs, gift shop revenue, rental car fees, and more. Moreover, the gifts were supposed to be prepared by the traditional confectionery shop involved in Nick's proposed plan. If it's known that we incurred such a huge loss at this critical time, Nick's position in the company would be jeopardized. Nick took a deep breath, seemingly trying to calm himself. All right, Mike. Go to New York right now and apologize to Mr. Mason. What? You're coming with me, right? I have urgent work to do. I trust you, which is why I'm entrusting this to you. Please. Mike, believing Nick's sincerity, agreed with a determined look on his face, saying, yes. That's Nick for you. Even if Mike went to apologize, Nick would shift all the blame onto him if the client didn't change their mind. Well, it was Mike's fault to begin with, so it served him right. About 3 hours later, Sam answered a call from somewhere and repeatedly apologized, saying, I'm very sorry. Everyone watched to see what was happening. After ending the call, he informed Nick with a weary tone. When Mike arrived at the client's company, he only made things worse, further infuriating Mr. Mason. He was demanding, get his boss here immediately. It was no wonder Sam was exhausted, dealing with such a call right after returning from training. What is that idiot doing? All right, Adam, you're coming with me. If sacrificing Mike didn't work, then I must be next. Normally, I'd want to refuse at all costs, but I saw an opportunity in this situation. If I can be of assistance, I'd be happy to join you. I obediently followed Nick, and we flew to New York. When we introduced ourselves at the reception, it became clear how serious the situation was, as the receptionist personally escorted us to the president's office. Angry voices leaked through the door, making both Nick and me uneasy. Excuse me. I'm Nick, the supervisor. I understand my subordinate has caused you trouble, and I deeply apologize. Nick, with his experience in the corporate world, knew enough to offer an apology before excuses. However, his customer service skills left much to be desired. I sighed as I saw Mike trembling like a small dog in the corner of the room. What kind of training are you giving your subordinates? Mr. Mason glared at Nick with a red face. The intensity of his gaze made even Nick take a step back. Regrettably, I joined this company only 2 years ago and was unaware of Mike's issues. I should have identified his shortcomings sooner. Indeed. I should have realized sooner. No sensible person would come to apologize and then give a lengthy presentation on the drawbacks of not using their in. Nick froze, his mouth slightly open. Suspecting the worst, I picked up the documents that had fallen to the floor. It seemed Mike hastily prepared these documents on the plane, listing the disadvantages. Disadvantage 1: if you change the venue for the company trip, employees might suspect it's for cost-cutting reasons, leading to a negative impression. Reading it aloud half-jokingly, Nick snatched the papers from my hand and checked the contents with a furious expression. Among the stack of documents was a receipt from a nearby convenience store's copy machine. I felt a pang of dread. hoping he hadn't shown the receipt as well. What do you think he said when I asked what kind of nerve he had to do this? I'm very sorry. Faced with the dire situation, Nick must have thought there was nothing left to do but apologize. In a voice smaller than I'd ever heard from him, he uttered words of apology. He said, "I'm a Harvard graduate. I don't believe I said anything wrong." Mike! What have you done? Forgetting his plan to pin the blame on Mike, Nick yelled loudly, even in front of Mr. Mason. "I didn't do anything wrong." "You're still saying that? Look at him." Mike pointed at me with a shaking hand. "I was assigned to headquarters in my 20s and now I'm a section chief. This guy only made it to headquarters at 42. Everything I've done proves I was right. So why are we losing the contract?" Having said his piece, Mike collapsed to the floor. "Of course. You were sent there because you had nowhere else to go." Mike never expected to hear such words from someone he looked down upon. He lunged at me, and Nick hurriedly stepped in to stop him. "Mr. Thompson told me Mike is a quick thinker, and to take good care of him." There's no way he was pushed aside. "Don't make things worse here. He didn't say quick thinker, he said only quick-witted, didn't he?" I don't remember that part. I recalled the many troubles Mike caused when he was a newbie. When Mike was on the front line, his pride was so high that he never apologized to customers. Customer service, especially in our job, doesn't work alone. It brings both good and bad situations. If the front staff or housekeepers made mistakes, or the cleaning company didn't properly clean a room, one had to apologize to the customers regardless of personal fault. Mike, in such situations, would never apologize, insisting he wasn't at fault. This often angered customers, and as the front desk leader, I frequently had to apologize on his behalf. He caused complaints and disrupted operations, which is why he was quickly moved to headquarters. In departments where he didn't interact directly with customers, his quick thinking was beneficial and things went well. But it seemed his flaws were starting to show. Corporate reservations are supposed to be entered into the system by the sales representative. But a quick check yesterday revealed that more than 10 items were missing from the client's reservation. The handover document clearly stated what needed to be prepared. Why didn't you enter it into the system? Why do we have to give them special treatment? Filling rooms near the banquet hall, setting up all the food in advance. Specifying the brand of wine, they're too demanding. No wonder he always angered customers, I thought, feeling a headache coming on. Grouping them in rooms near the banquet hall is for our benefit too. It makes it easier for the staff to set up beds and serve breakfast since everyone's schedule is synchronized. As for the other requests, Mr. Mason suggested them to lighten our load. I didn't know that. Nick finally seemed to realize that Mike was the one who had angered the client. What did you say to them? I just told them we wouldn't give them special treatment anymore. We shouldn't waste effort on things that don't bring in money. I was utterly exasperated at his lack of understanding of customer service. Of course, we shouldn't comply with unreasonable demands. But carrying over successful practices from past stays makes customers feel remembered and enhances their experience. Good memories encourage repeat visits. That's part of our job. I looked down at Mike, who was sitting on the floor. In our job, nothing is a waste. Mr. Thompson likely moved you to the sales department, hoping you'd finally understand this. How do you think he feels now that you've failed to meet his expectations? Mike, tears in his eyes, fled the president's office. I was amazed he still hadn't apologized. You have it tough, Adam. It's okay, we're all employees of the same company. I deeply apologize for this disrespectful incident. Especially after all the care you've shown us. If it weren't for you, Adam, I really would have stopped staying here. When I heard you were moving to the sales department, I was willing to reconsider if you handled it. Seeing us talk so amicably, Nick's face contorted. Do you two know each other? Adam's service is excellent. I always requested him specifically. Normally, we don't accept specific staff requests, but we made an exception for Mr. Mason, adjusting my shifts accordingly. He had personally stayed at our hotel just before my transfer, and during casual conversation, I mentioned, I'm moving to the sales department soon. If I hadn't told him then, things could have been much worse. Please continue to take care of us. I look forward to it. On the return flight, Nick awkwardly offered me a can of beer. It's still working hours. Of course, I had no intention of forgiving him for a single beer. Nick might try to pin everything on Mike and avoid any consequences. While pondering this, a startling fact came to light. Nick, the tea bottles for the plan have arrived. I handed Nick a bottle labeled with our inn's name. They look good. What are you talking about? These are plastic bottles. I had assumed we would use the trendy, high-end bottling tea. But what arrived were ordinary plastic bottles of tea with customized labels. The only unique aspect was the label, which had the inn's name, making it look customized. Upon further investigation, I discovered that a substantial amount of money was set to be paid to the tea company. It was priced like bottling tea. Does this plastic bottle really cost $100 each? The tea inside is specially blended for us. The extra cost is for that. Wouldn't it be better to use another tea company? Or is there a specific reason we must use this one? As Nick continued to make excuses, I showed him a printed email. I informed the tea company's president, Mr. Mitchell, that we discovered irregular payments and he confessed. He said you two were high school classmates and planned to split the extra money. That idiot. Why did he confess? That's not important. You should worry about yourself, this could turn into a police matter. Opening the bottle cap, I suggested. How about calming down with this tea? It supposedly has a relaxing effect. Nick drank the tea frantically. In the following days, decisions were made about their fates. Mike was reassigned to the General Affairs Department, with no chance of transfer or promotion, as per Mr. Thompson's orders. As for Nick, since the payment to the tea company hadn't yet been made, he narrowly avoided legal trouble. Instead, he was encouraged to leave the company, and to avoid further complications, Nick submitted his resignation. Rumor has it that connections between HR departments have made it difficult for him to find new employment. Even though it was good to have those two gone, something unexpected happened in the sales department. Everyone became motivated and united in refining the 50th anniversary plan. In the end, my plan was adopted. We collaborated with the Tourist Information Center to provide personalized guides. The plan, tailored to the number of guests, was truly special for the 50th anniversary. Hey, is Adam's family coming to stay? I immediately booked that special plan for my family. Sam noticed it on the reservation list and quickly picked up on it. Yes, I'm inviting my father. That's great. I might invite my parents too. I lacked the courage to face my father just as Adam. But here, with the confidence Mr. Mason praised, I felt ready. The 50th anniversary plan was a perfect opportunity to reconnect with my father. I hoped to bring back the days when we could laugh together as we once did.